restrictive on things that don't have an impact on neighbors. For example, if somebody was a private tutor and they've got somebody coming to their house to learn reading, would that be should that require a home occupation license? Should there be a city process to go through for something like that? And it may be worth having a work session at some point in the year to talk through, are we satisfied with the way the restrictions are currently drafted? Or is there any modifications we want to consider to enable liberalization to allow things that don't have negative external impacts off the property?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to looking at that. I think it's a fair point, and there's a lot of feedback I've got from people in the city is that the hurdle to do any project, even if it's a large commercial project, is huge. People complain about the long tail aspect about having their escrow held on to for so long because, we have to wait a whole another year to see if the bushes is gonna live and things like that. So things around that nature, I think we need to look at, and, which you brought up, we talked about before, about the commercial and industrial and relooking at things from years ago. That's the hardest conversations I think we've had is we're dealing with things that have been put in place 10, 20 years ago, and the reality then is not what we're seeing now.
Yeah, they don't apply to now.
Right.
Yep.
So if we could relook at some of those things, I think it'd be a great opportunity.
I think it's a good conversation to have. Does it need to be a goal, or is it just something we do? A work session, we said.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be a goal. It could just be a work session to review that part of code.
Well, one thing that we do have coming up is a review, which was requested, of the planning process. So on the 25th, planning is actually going to be providing some of the information in order to clarify some of the questions that have been asked about our planning process. So that's a first step in that direction, to clarify some of the concerns that have been expressed about barriers in the planning process, and also an update on escrows. They're doing a deep dive. APTO's doing a deep dive in escrows and reviewing our processes. And so as part of the contract that we have, Vicki Holthouse was in today, and how we do escrows will be part of that conversation. So she'll be meeting in the future with Kevin and with Natalie and with Jody, and how we do that to ensure that we are efficient and effective, and then potentially in our processes clarify so we're getting the kind of responses that we need from developers too. They're sitting on their hands in some cases, which are making it difficult for us to move forward with escrows. So
One thing that I talked to Jay about yesterday that I'd like to see is some type of modeling around growth and what is good growth to the city and what is potentially detrimental growth. If residential grows X, what's the impact on not only our tax base but our expenses, and does it actually affect the tax rate that we have in mind? Or we've all said, I shouldn't say it, take that back. A lot of us have said that we want commercial growth, right, to offset the tax implications on residential. But now we have, what is it, fiscal
disparities.
So we don't get to keep dollar for dollar, right? So what's the sweet spot, and where should we grow and where shouldn't we grow? What's our best benefit? And then maybe we could curtail some of our zoning to that and how we want to look at where we want to be in the future.
It's a great input to the update to the comp plan.
And maybe Tammy can come up with some type of model that helps us find that.
Springstead used to do that kind of work. They did some financial modeling. They don't exist anymore. They transitioned and became Baker Tilly. I was talking with Kendra about it today to see if she knew of anybody that did that type of developmental modeling, and she was going to come back with me because the people who used to do it don't exist. They all retired when Springstead sold. And so
If they do a Kendra would be the person that probably would know. So
I've seen maps from strong towns where they map profitability for the city by, I think it's property. They probably have a consultant they use to do that. But if you check with them, you could probably find a reference to who they've used.
Strong towns?
Strong Towns.
Yeah, we're familiar with them too. I mean, there are multiples of, if, the tax rates are based on multiples of property values. And so there's no standard commercial property. You know, if you build a 14-story tower on 1 acre, it's not the same value as a Quick Trip. So like if it's worth 30 million bucks, they have the same, I believe they have the same tax rate as a Quick Trip, but the Quick Trip's only worth like 2 million bucks. So it's so dependent, like housing, you can kind of say, well, the average house is 700 grand or whatever, and each acre is gonna yield you. In housing, I think commercial properties tax is twice that of residential. That's, so like if you've got an acre and it's worth 2 million in housing, it's gonna yield half that of an acre of Quick Trip, even if it's the same value. So like commercial's always worth more, but you don't know what the value is gonna be of a commercial property.
Right, and then add in the fiscal disparity
Right.
stuff on top of that, and it's even.
Is disparities only accounted for on commercial or residential, or is
Commercial,
it the
industrial.
whole ball of wax?
Commercial, industrial. So what we were talking about yesterday is, having just come from Shakopee, they gave up, I think the number was 6.5 million last year in fiscal disparities. And the frustration came because there's been a lot of intentional about managed growth, which is also a priority here. How are we managing growth? And the idea was diversity in terms of your tax base. And so putting the majority of the tax burden on commercial and industrial to relieve some of the tax burden on residential. And they've been pretty successful at that. That started to flip post-COVID, and more burden has come on residential. But the frustration part is they look to a neighbor in the south, like Lakeville, who doesn't have a similar commercial and industrial base, and they're actually getting LGA
Oh,
and
they
other
are?
support that,
Gosh,
right, so you, how frustrating.
we
when-
pay LGA.
Right.
To Lakeville, that's crazy.
So when you look at those calculations for fiscal disparities, it's frustrating, and I think that there's some merit in like, okay, what would financial modeling look like? And then you put on that, not just in a perfect scenario, but you also have the nuances of trying to maintain the character that Corcoran desires. And so as we try to find our right partners, that helps us shape for the future comp plan how we communicate that in order to attract the type of businesses that are going to contribute to the tax base, but also provide the type of experiences that represent the type of character that Corcoran wants to communicate.
If we can find someone that can do that kind of modeling, I'm all for it.
So I'll do some research on that. Allers might do it too. I'll check with Tammy, maybe will do some as part of their larger financial planning. Do you want that to be a goal and would be a measurable?
It's gonna cost money to have them do that.
It is.
Just keep
Well,
that in
yeah,
mind.
for sure.
Well, all goals are gonna cost money, right?
Yeah, but they're gonna be dealing with so many unknown variables. They're not gonna be able to tell you the value of commercial property.
No, I know, but I mean, we always heard that, commercial is 80 cents on the dollar. The cost of commercial to the city is 80 cents for every dollar of tax revenue
Yeah.
comes in. So it sounds great, but if you gotta give 50% of that away in fiscal disparity, what are you really getting by having all this commercial then?
Yeah, but he's asking if we hire someone out to do that. That's a different question than us figuring out what the actual math is on this stuff.
Well, I
Like
don't
if-
think anybody up here can figure out that math. I think it's gonna,
What?
there's so many variables involved.
We've
with
just
it.
talked about a bunch of them. Like, we don't need Tammy Amdahl to charge us $100 grand
No, but when
to
you
figure out.
place it over your zoning maps, right, and kind of get an idea on that, do you want to grow commercial industrial? Because that benefits us more, or do we want to shrink commercial industrial and expand residential?
But there's so much variability in the value
Yeah.
of commercial.
I know.
Like, a Quick Trip isn't gonna have the same value as a
Right, you're gonna have
healthcare
to, you're gonna have
tower.
to go to some mean to try to figure it out.
And part of that you can address with the specific kind of zone you put on a particular parcel. So
We
the,
don't have that zoning capability right now, do we?
we don't have it in code, well, we've got C1 and C2,
Yeah.
right? So there's some difference between those. But once you know what is financially beneficial for the city, you could tailor the zoning ordinances and the zoning map to accommodate that. Right now, we don't exactly know what that would need to look like for it to work out the way we want it to. But
It depends on your definition of beneficial to the city. Like diversification of the tax base is still gonna be a diversification of the past tax base, even if we pay a certain percentage to LGA, right?
Well, diversification isn't necessarily always a benefit. I mean,
No, but we've identified it, I'm saying, benefit is in the eye of the beholder. There is a benefit to diversification, but if the cost is that diversification means we should actually put houses there instead of, then it's not a good. But there isn't gonna be a mathematical equation to figure out benefit to the city, because there's multi-variables that are gonna be included in that benefit to the city. You can't quantify diversification.
I just mean in terms of revenue that a parcel will provide versus the cost that it imposes to support it.
We can figure that out without Tammy Amdahl paying $100,000.
I think it'd be good to have an idea though, especially when developers are coming and say, I want you to rezone this from commercial to mixed residential, multifamily.
Haven't you ever done that before a meeting?
I've never figured out the math.
That's part of what I was excited to have Maggie do for us, is create an understanding of what is the carrying cost of a home on 500 feet of street frontage versus a laundromat versus a bank. And what should we be trying to encourage through our zoning and comp plan process?
If this is acceptable for the first quarter, I can go out and see, I don't even know if anybody's still doing this. So I can go out, talk with Kendra, and I can research the market and find out, are there services available? If there are services, what's the scope of those services? And what's the cost of those services?
Yeah.
And then I can come back with that to talk about what's possible as a
Sounds like a
measurable,
good plan.
if that's acceptable.
There's gotta be an average on commercial. If we start talking banks, laundromats, those kind of things, the
Well, that's what
variability
we'll
of that
figure
is
out.
huge. But an average commercial benefit, an average industrial benefit, an average residential benefit based off of density, there's gotta be something.
You can go on the Hennepin County website and look at the taxable base of commercial properties, and it's all across the board. There's no average.
But they might know, well, let's see what's available.
Yeah,
first,
the-
Then we'll take it from there.
Well, yeah, I agree with what you're
Yep.
saying. I'm just saying, like, it's,
but I mean, if we're gonna sit here and try and analyze and look at, okay, we want a row of banks because the taxes are more beneficial to us than a row of laundromats. Huge variable, huge disparity between those two things, but there's gotta be something out there. And I think I've heard it from a number of people that industrial is the most bang for our buck. You can put up industrial and there's very little support from the city that needs to be done, so.
Right, but if
But
it's
we
all
don't
going
want
out the
the
door-
Dayton, we don't want a Rogers built, we don't want that.
still
What were you gonna say?
If all the money goes out the door, we have to share it with the rest of the county.
Well, that's the whole other thing, yes. It's
That's
crazy
what
where,
they'll be.
I thought we
Where the
wanted
money
to just
goes.
do short-term storage. I thought that was the.
all storage.
The consultancy that
More
does the
storage,
mapping
more
I was
storage.
talking about is Urban 3.
We had,
Just found it.
before you came, we did the,
A
the
moratorium.
the cleanup on, for 4 years, we targeted people with unauthorized storage in their yard.
All code enforcement.
Code enforcement, yeah, so there's always been a ton of storage. We finally got some storage that actually paid taxes, and now we're getting rid of that too.
Well, or maybe just putting tapping the brakes a little bit on how much there is.
I shared a mail that I received with Jay yesterday on
Neighbors.
wanting, I don't know if any of you guys got it, willing to pay you for on-site storage for unused land. And it's from a company out of Utah.
They want to pay people to go on their land and
Store cars and boats.
To store cars on our land, but use
really?
them as the contact for storage
Oh, yeah,
and
that's a
stuff
great
like
idea.
that. Well, I just,
They must not have looked into our ordinance.
They didn't Google
Can't really
your
do
name.
that here.
my biggest thing that I was trying to do was get a phone number to call them and say, are you considering the ordinances of the area you're mailing this to? And I was hoping that somebody
Yeah.
would say, well, that's up to the person to research that, and it's not up to us to do that. It was just a shady flyer. It was very well put together, but it was,
Interesting.
made me laugh, so.
Something about my mailbox being right next to the trash can it probably went like that.
That's what I mean. It was amazing. I usually throw those things away, but all of a sudden I'm like, somebody made $12,000 storing automobiles and.
Retirement plan. You got 10 acres of.
I got all kinds of places, but it'd all be in my front yard and I'd be out of
Storing
ordinances.
autos with someone else's contraband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the three goals for this, ensure high-quality
EVs,
market-driven growth.
RVs.
Number one, we're going to continue to review zoning around commercial industrial, continue to review that. Number two, the code update regarding density of 3. And number 3 will be explore the possibility of financial modeling of the deliverable in the first quarter. Any other questions?
put.
Thank you.
Okay, last core strategy is provide high-quality, innovative municipal services. First objective is maintain fiscal stability and affordability. Second is perform exceptionally within the structure of limited government services. Number 3, excel at managing change. The short-term goal that was identified was aligned budget process with population growth and inflation. The measurable was the 2024 budget meeting the goal of equaling growth and inflation. And then you approved the budget to that end.
Pretty straightforward. Keep it up.
So are there any other goals?
On that one, we've kicked around making sure we're maximizing interest income. That would be an area that I'd be interested
Don't
in
we have
seeing
a work
some
session coming up on that?
action.
I think.
Michelle's nodding her head.
That'll be good.
When is that one?
March?
I'm checking right now.
I guess March, I want to say 24th for some reason. March something. I was just looking at it. Because we called a February work session and one of the 2 March meetings.
So the goal would be, short-term goal to maximize interest income. The measurable would be the work session at the end of the first quarter. One that I wanted to ask about was excel at managing change. As I was sitting down with Tammy and we were talking about our long-term plan, one of the things in managing change, it would be wise for us to either do a space needs study and potentially also consider land acquisition if we are thinking that our present spaces aren't going to meet our future needs, because property is never going to get cheaper. And so I just put that out as, is that a goal? Or is that something I should be concerned about? When I saw it in the long-term financial plan, those were the 2 things that came to mind was I need to do a space needs study so that I can communicate to you what the future could and should look like, and tied with that is the fire service plan, as well as those other needs. And then second, in order for us to do that, we probably also need to continue, and my understanding is there was a past work session to discuss potential spots. And so now the question is, the people who were involved in that are no longer here. Is that something you want to revisit?
We talked last year about ensuring that we, in light of the fire service plan, we know we're gonna need 4 to 5 fire stations at some point in the future. And land is likely not going to get cheaper when it's closer to the time to build those. It would make sense for us, I think, to look at where we would want to be and identify appropriate parcels sooner rather than later. So I would support that continuing to be an objective.
And I think maybe, when's the last time you guys met as a subcommittee?
The last time we met was the work session. I think all of us were at that
So maybe
one.
we
And
should-
there hasn't been a follow-up.
Who's the subcommittee?
It was Dean and I.
Dean and Jeremy.
okay.
So maybe you guys should set up a meeting to pick up from where you left off and trying to think.
I think we left it with staff.
Yeah, we did.
at the last
Which would have been with Jess.
I have some of the
And Matt.
documents
Okay.
on, that we worked on as part of that subcommittee. I think Kevin and I were both on that subcommittee as well.
Natalie was.
Natalie.
Okay.
Land acquisition? Or what was the scope?
It was the
of
context of planning for city
Oh.
facilities.
Oh, okay.
So fire was one. We also talked about, do we need more public works space? At some point, we've talked about having an expanded city hall or a new city hall. So there were a couple parcels that we talked, I think 10 different ones were identified as
Oh,
potential
yeah,
options.
we saw that.
And there were some that were more favorable than others based upon road access and wetland proportion and where the population was going to be. But I don't know what happened after we picked out the 2 or 3 that we really were most interested in.
It was,
Follow
yeah, under the, looking at city campus planning, and so I think the top 3 were preferred, were identified, and letters were sent to those property owners without a response. So I
Right.
think
Did we get a response back?
there was, it sounds like no response to the letters, but there was no in-person contact.
So maybe we should follow up with that.
Follow with an in-person contact,
Yeah.
or at least an introduction letter.
Can we just,
Go out under Jessica's name?
Yeah.
So maybe a revised letter under Jay's name, followed by
I can
some
call her and
in-person
ask
contact.
where she left some of that.
can we rescind our sale of the land just south of here?
I think it's too late.
A little bit too late on that one.
The ink is dry.
So's the concrete.
Good.
March 14th was that
March
work session.
14th. Okay, thank you. But yeah, maybe it's, you guys set up a time to meet to follow up on anything you need to as a subcommittee. And as a city, maybe you and I touch base on where Jess left off, and Matt, where Jess left off with those letters, and we do send out follow-ups and then reach out in person as needed.
Alan and I will relax on this one.
Sounds good.
And then as far as the timing of a future needs space study, I'm not saying this is a goal for 2024. I'm just saying as we're doing that, that impacts us some of the things that we are talking about, exploring land acquisition. So is it going to be sufficient for our needs? I wasn't on the subcommittee, so I don't know.
We were looking for parcels that would have a net buildable area between 15 and 30 acres or more, with the thought that it could accommodate a pretty significant amount of future expansion if necessary. But it was only one location. This wasn't looking at the entirety of the city, so.
I would say if I was a city administrator, I would wait on a land acquisition and remodel until after the election. Because it could be an election issue. If you think that this council would support that. I didn't say that though, but I would think about it.
Well,
Well,
the
no,
timing of a
nobody's gonna
space
have
study, there's nothing that we'd be able to act on it right now, other than it would have informed if we're already looking at, exploring acquisition of spaces that would be sufficient. That's where we're at right now. We're not developing plans for a space. That's not where we're
And I
at.
think at a certain point, we're gonna have to do a space needs study to figure out when we, I mean, we're pretty close to max capacity here. We've shifted around some offices and done a good job of maximizing it, but I think maybe a more official data point that we can use would be worthwhile at some point, yeah.
I told JCB that we're going to start with swinging desks from the
There you go.
ceiling.
Hoverboards, hover desks.
But, yeah.
Any other recommendations regarding innovative municipal services?
I think that's it.
I think we do a good job there, honestly.
Maybe a internal engineering capacity evaluation. We do a lot of construction now with City Center Drive and Hackamore and the City Park coming up. We pay a lot of construction administrative expenses to Stantec. At some point, it may make sense for us to have some capability for project management and oversight internally versus paying them to do it. I'm not sure if we're at that tipping point yet, but
That will be part of the capability of the development superintendent. won't it?
Yeah, that's currently out for solicitation. I don't know that we've had any applicants yet, so if
Nobody
anyone's
interested.
listening,
Is there a
I've
link
heard
we
some
can
other
share
communities
anywhere?
have had those positions open for
Might know some
18 months,
places.
so it's a challenging environment.
Is there a link we can share anywhere to like a job application? Can you send that?
I'll send it to you.
That'd be great.
I'll send it to all of you.
Thank you.
I think to dovetail on your point, trying to have a city planner not entrenched with the building community, I think is something we absolutely need here. Because as we're building, and it may not be the existence of bias, but the perception of existence of bias with the planning outfit that's our city planner, but in bed with builders so much, we have to get rid of that. That's bad. So, you didn't mention it, but I'll mention it.
See, it's like the
We need
ongoing-
someone to advocate for us on the planning side, and we don't have that.
well, we have Natalie. Do we feel like she's not able to be effective for some reason?
Either, well, we need to expand her role then. I think a serious consideration needs to be discussed about having our planner working, well, one, as a member of the, as a member of a lobbying organization for builders creates a bad perception of bias. And remember, as it exists today, if our planner gets a job through city council, their company earns hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if we say no, then they don't earn anything. So whether they actually think that way or not, if we turn down, so they're inclined to recommend that we go forward with any project they bring to us because they know the revenue for their company is going to be really high if we say yes.
Yeah.
Our planner does not work for us.
So you're maybe saying,
Wouldn't they have to disclose that, though?
They do disclose it. It's disclosed.
And how many times does it come up?
Never. We talk about it, planning talks about it.
Because if you talk to the people in some business people in this community, they'll tell you that our planner is probably an over advocate for the city and an under advocate for the businesses.
Yeah, but whatever the case may be, I'm saying the perception of bias,
Yeah.
whether it's actually there or not, the people who we hire out to be our planning, the Corcoran city planners, if we say no to their project, their company gets no revenue. If we say yes to their project, their company gets hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue. So our planner is super biased to have us accept building projects. It shows up all the time. Have they ever said, no, we shouldn't do this? You guys should vote no on this project because whatever. They always say that we should vote yes on whatever they come forward. And I'm not saying anyone's being nefarious. I'm saying,
Well, I think what
Mr.
I've heard her say is that there's nothing in the ordinance that, she doesn't say that we have to vote yes. She says we have to vote yes because our ordinance says it meets the standards of our ordinances. And if we're not gonna vote yes, we have to have findings of fact as for why we're not.
Jeremy, you had a point?
So you sound exactly like me in 2020, John. And I want to make one point of distinction. I totally agree, and that's why I wanted us to proceed with having our own city employee who serves as the planner. That's why I advocated for having someone in Natalie's role be a city employee. I would be perfectly content to see us not have to use a consultant. I also don't like the fact that the consultant has a financial interest in the decisions that we make. I also feel like we have had projects in the past where it's felt like the contracted planner has been advocating for the development. I have not seen that recently. And I think the reason for that is that I continued under Brad Martins to, whenever I saw evidence of that, I would pull him and Kendra into a discussion about it's important that the planning input that comes to council is unbiased and frames the issue and does not attempt to influence the policy choice that council is able to make in those situations. I feel like it has gotten better. I would not oppose trying to bring a different resource pool to support Natalie. But I don't think it's currently a problem. I think it used to be a problem. I think council has managed to extricate ourselves from that situation as we've worked through issues over the course of the last 3 years.
May I make a recommendation on this? Because there's a couple staffing things that have come up. Would it be worthwhile for us to talk? This is just one area, but there's also potentially other areas that, you know, if we had a lot more time, that would be worthwhile for us to discuss. What if we set a time to review current staffing and discuss future staffing needs, what were projected, and then that would be an opportunity for council to provide feedback to make sure that we have our present staffing model aligned with the council's priorities.
I think one element of that would be really helpful is to understand how much of the work that happens in planning is happening at the contractor versus happening internally, and what level of oversight and control Natalie is able to exert.
And then when we have that maybe broader discussion, are we looking at, like you initially started us on this conversation was, do we look at bringing engineering in-house? Maybe it's more we look at bringing planning further in-house and we prioritize that.
And looking not just at that step, but building inspections. And, you know, we talked about code inspectors,
Code enforcement,
fire,
yeah.
code enforcement. There's a lot of areas that I think if we did an overall discussion of staffing, some other concerns might get flushed out, and to get some clear guidance on you on how you would like us to move forward with addressing those concerns, I think would be helpful to staff.
Yeah, I think you have to do it understanding it's budgeting compatible, right?
Yep.
So there's always a budget impact, and so with the trade-offs, like, okay, you know, it's like those games. If you get this, that means we can't do this. We don't have this person. Here's how we mitigate that, mitigating strategies. But I think that would be a helpful discussion, especially me being here, because I've looked at what the proposed staffing model is, and I think it would be good to revisit to make sure that it aligns with your priorities and can be met with the budget priorities as well.
That sounds great.
Can we do that in second quarter with the other things that we
I think it works for us. And that should be it.
So to revisit the goals for this core strategy of innovative municipal services, one, explore how we maximize our interest income. That will be part of a work session coming up on March 14th, 2023. So that's the measurable. 24. Sorry, 24. I am.
I'm going to do that for a while.
It's been a day. And then the next one, planning for future facility needs, rather than just being specific about land acquisition or something, but future facility need planning as the goal. And then the third one will be review present and future staffing on the second quarter. Any other goals for innovative municipal services?
That'll keep us busy.
So the plan is I will work to get this updated as a document, and we'll provide the draft form for next week's council meeting so that we can tweak it appropriately and then choose whether to adopt it or modify it and then adopt it.
Perfect. Sounds good. Anything else?
No.
Dean?
And I asked the question on timing, and the last few years, I've always wondered why we're setting goals for 2024 in 2024. We did 2023 in February, March timeframe.
I think it's just because
Should
we're
be done
scrambling so much
sooner.
at the end of the year.
I'm just asking for a timeline. I'd much rather do this in September for the next year, if that makes sense, than to do it in the same year. I'd just like to get,
We could look into that, and maybe it's worthwhile at least reaching out to if we wanted to do a Phil Kern or someone in the future years. 'Cause we kind of ran into a bit late.
availability issues.
Yeah, so maybe we look into it earlier.
Well, one of the things that I talked with Dean about when we met was, from a budgeting perspective, it's really helpful for us to, we're doing 2024 year of execution goals. As we're also doing the 2025 preliminary budget, it would be, ideally, in an ideal world, this would be a great time to do the 2025 goals.
Yeah.
Because then that helps drive our budgetary priorities for 2025. We're kind of doing it backwards. We've established the budget, and then now we're saying, well, what do we want to do? But we're really constrained by the budget and what we're capable of doing, rather than saying, here's what we want to achieve, and then how do we make our budgetary priorities to achieve our objectives. And so I can't get there in 2024, but I'd just like to suggest
in the future.
that we consider that going forward. It would be really helpful feedback to staff for budgeting for 2025, particularly when it comes to things like staffing, equipment,
Plowing trails.
If
Yeah.
staff can
Services.
make that work, I don't think any of us are specifically tied to this has to be the timing.
Absolutely. I totally agree with, trying to plan for next year starting in Q2, Q3.
Yeah, but we don't know the makeup of the council next year. In November, there's an election.
Right.
Maybe you do a 2-year planning cycle.
That's a very interesting idea.
So we could have planned 24 and 25 tonight. And next year we plan 25, 26.
That's a great idea.
Another way to look at
That's a
it,
good idea.
yeah.
I mean, most of these are retreads anyways.
Yeah.
So maybe we just look into what the different options are for timing and scope. Okay, if nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.